So let's talk about the first of the two main principles of neurographic art. The first one is neurographic lines, which is what we use in order to depict energy. The sheet of paper we have for our neurographic art is considered our pleroma. It is the field of probabilities and possibilities. And what we do is we express our intentions and our energies onto it with lines, with neurographic lines. Now, a neurographic line is going to be a counterintuitive line that is organic, it goes where it is not expected, and it never repeats itself. So that was a lot of things I just threw at you. So let's talk about the first part. What is a counterintuitive line? So anytime that you put your hand on a paper, and I suggest that you do this with me as we go through this right now, put your hand on your paper somewhere and feel where it wants to go right now. Right now, as I put my hand on this paper, it just wants to go straight this way. So this is what you would call an intuitive line. It's just, it feels comfortable. You just want to take it the way that your gut is telling you. Now, what I want to do is I want to program my mind, so I don't want to repeat programming that is already there. So if this feels comfortable, it's because it's based on programming that is already in my mind. So I'm not going to draw this line, and I'm not going to draw the opposite line that's not counterintuitive, because essentially this is the extension of the same line, whichever way I draw it. So I'm going to put my hand here, and I'm going to go anywhere but where my hand wants to go. I draw a line, a straight line for now, and then I wait for a second. And then I feel again where it wants to go, and I make a decision to go anywhere but there. Right now mine wants to go straight down, so I'm going to go anywhere but there. And then I'm going to wait again, and I'm going to feel where it wants to go. So do this with me. Right now it wants to go straight down, so I'm going to go anywhere but there. And continue doing this a few times on your piece of paper, and see how it feels in your body for you to go against what it wants you to do. It will feel uncomfortable in your body. You will feel resistance and discomfort in going where it doesn't feel comfortable. And that's the whole intention. So this is in no way a neurographic line. We drew all straight lines, and we have very sharp corners, and these are by definition human traits. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to now talk about what a neurographic line is. A neurographic line by definition is organic. So it means it is curved. So it is going to be a curved line that goes where it is not expected. So it is not going to be a repeated pattern like this, or like this, or like this. None of these are neurographic lines. A neurographic line is an organic line that goes where it is not expected. It is counterintuitive. So at every point along this line, I'm trying to decide where it wants to go, and I'm going anywhere but there. Okay? You see, I'm not really repeating any patterns on this line. Now, if I were to do this line again, this is what we mean by it never repeats itself. Even if I were to use the last line as a guide and draw a new line, it is not going to go, as long as it is neurographic, it's not going to go exactly the same route. So what I want you to do on a new piece of paper is I want you to draw a few neurographic lines. I would like for you to start from one side of the page and go to the next. If you feel called to draw them from bottom to top or top to bottom, it's absolutely up to you at this point, because all that we are doing is we are giving our mind and our body an opportunity to get used to us drawing lines that go where you do not expect them to go. Okay, and this is go as slowly as you need to go. If I'm going too fast, you don't need to go at my speed. Go at your own speed. And just feel how that feels as you draw these lines that all of a sudden change direction. Now, as I said, neurographic lines are lines that depict energy. So in general, we want these lines to be moving forward. So even if I have a line that momentarily moves backwards, eventually it will come back forward. Okay, one of the things that you want to avoid with neurographic lines is doing things like loops. So as you draw a line, if you come back on yourself and then you create a loop, this energy along this line goes into this loop and it just goes round and round and round on itself and it gets stuck. So when we create a loop in neurographic art, I'll show you later, we'll actually dissolve this. So there's more pathways of energies that comes to the same point. So that no longer feels like a stuck point of energy. It feels like it has a lot of ways in and out. It becomes a nexus rather than a loop. So we don't necessarily want to go over ourselves. So even if you find yourself going backwards for a moment with your neurographic lines, eventually you're going to find your way forward, right? So I can go backwards as much as I want, but I'm going to eventually come forward. Okay? So do this a few times on your sheet and draw a few neurographic lines, and don't be afraid of intersections, because that's the next important part of what we're doing, and I will explain that next. So take a few minutes right now and draw 8, 10, 12, 20, however many it takes for you to feel complete. Draw a few lines and neurographic lines on your sheet of paper. Now, you also don't need to start all of your lines from one end and move to the other. If you have a junction point that is really busy and you feel like you want to take a line out of there, you are always welcome to do it. If you start to feel like drawing lines from right to left, from left to right, feels very comfortable, try drawing your lines the opposite way and see what difference that makes in the quality of your lines and how it feels. Okay, so try different directions, different forms of lines, and see how it goes. Now, chances are at the very beginning, what you're going to do is you're going to make sharp moves. You're not going to really trust yourself, and you're going to do things that look like this, with these jagged edges of, and then do some things like this where you're repeating a pattern. These are very normal at the beginning when we're starting to learn neurographic art. So when you have this kind of vibration in your hand, it just means you're not trusting yourself from one point to the next. This resolves itself the more you do neurolines. With practice, you learn to trust your pen and allow it to move a little bit more freely from one decision point to the next. So even if there is a small vibration, it's on purpose and not because you are second guessing yourself along the way. But this process needs to come before something like this appears. Okay, so don't be overly critical of yourself. Just become aware of any patterns that you see repeating within your line, and with intention, because neurographic lines are very intentional, try to resolve them and try to create a more smooth pathway as we go along. Because if you think of your lines as pathways of energy, when they're bumpy, you're going to create, if you're, think of yourself on as a like a car driving on this road, these bumps you're going to feel. You're going to need a pretty good shock absorber not to feel these bumps in life. And in life, we would like to create ease and grace. So we want our lines to have energy, movement, direction, and fluidity. Okay, so take a few moments and draw a few neurographic lines on a piece of paper, and then once you're complete, we can move forward to the next step, which is called rounding. If you're ready to move on to the next step, let's talk about what rounding is. Anytime that you have an intersection within those neurographic lines, your brain conceives this as a problem. It conceives this as a dead end. And so what it does is, if you consider yourself moving as a car along this line, this corner is too tight for you to make. This is going to create a crash. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to create a ramp from one line to the next and make this path a smooth, curved one. So don't be afraid of going over your lines again. I'm rounding that as we speak. And we're going to do this on all four sides of this roadway. So on all sides, sometimes your rounding is going to have more than just four sides. So once I color this solid, this is now a more smooth pathway for this travel of energy. And when your mind sees this with these smooth lines, it's more calming to the brain. It is more reassuring to the brain. We're creating harmony when we round things. And the reason for this is because if I were to put 4 dots on my paper, your brain would recognize that quickly as a square. The same thing is happening here, but not with a square. Your brain actually sees a small portion of circles. It will complete this pattern inside of itself, and it creates circles. Circles are a sign of no beginnings, no end, eternity, universal consciousness, God consciousness, Christ consciousness, whatever you want to call them. They're very pleasing to our brain because they have no beginning and no end. So circles in general are very calming and harmonizing in our brain, and that's what we want to do. We want to harmonize these lines of energy that are intermingling with each other. So what I don't want you to do is if there's an intersection, don't put this in a circle, right? So that's not what we're creating. We're not actually putting this in a circle and then coloring that solid. This is what architects do when they want to show elevations and so on and so forth. So if you find that you've done something like this instead of rounding in your art, you can actually fix it by actually taking a big chunk out of that and coloring that solid. So I'm going to do this on all the sides, so you see the difference between rounding and putting a circle over your intersection, right? So what I'm doing is I'm not accentuating or emphasizing these intersections. I'm not putting them in circles. I'm actually rounding them out. So I need to round this a little bit better, right? So in an intersection, a rounded intersection, we look like this. So this is a very blown up version of it. So if we were to go back to some of the practice pages, if I'm going to round any of these edges, it's a matter of going through them. Now, as you round, it is important that you don't create these areas where we're just accentuating that intersection. I don't want to create these fat sections against thin lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure the whole thing is smooth. Sometimes it's actually easier to follow the shape that you've created and just making sure that all of the sections are round. So avoid going back and forth. Avoid doing things like that because these create jagged edges and jagged lines. We want to have very smooth movements in one direction and just round everything off. Okay, so you see the only time I'm going back and forth is in the parts where I'm making dark. Otherwise, my pen flows in one direction, and that's going to be the easiest way of rounding. So if you go through around the whole shape, that's one way of rounding. If you come into each intersection and just round the intersection, that's another way of rounding. One is a little bit faster than the other, right? So now what I want you to do is, now that you know the basics of rounding and you have a whole page full of neurographic lines, I want you to actually go in and I want you to start rounding all of these corners and see how that feels. So now you know the very basics of neurographic art, rounding and neurolines. So I look forward to seeing your first pages, and I look forward to seeing you in class where we get to talk more about how to use these neurographic lines and rounding to let go of that which no longer serves and program the things that we want to have in our lives. See you soon.